Hey there guys, Music Fan here. How you guys doing? We're going to go on an album review, and not just any album review, an iconic album review of U2's fifth studio album, the glorious, the magnificent, the fantastic, the gracious, and the inspirational fifth U2 album, The Joshua Tree. Released in 1987. We're going to go on an album review, so let's not waste any time. So yeah, like everything just changes with this album. This album is an iconic, legendary album, and is the album that launched U2 into the main stratosphere. Now, all throughout this time, U2 had been building up towards this very epic moment. They had started with Boy, and then continuing to October, then War, then Unforgettable Fire, and to finally this album comes out. And everything from here on in changes for U2. Nothing is ever going to be the same for them. And essentially, what started as a discovery, it was discovery of for the band that around this time they had started to discover Irish roots music. Well, they'd been listening to Irish roots music, but then they discovered that hints of Irish roots music was being blended with American music. And so, for the beginning of the recording of this album, the band discovered that these two blends of genres began to occur, and realized that U2 had been a post-punk band at this point, but never really, apart from the Unforgettable Fire, really never venturing outside of the post-punk genre that they had always been up until this point. Yeah, they dabbled with a little more European experimentation with the Unforgettable Fire, and that, in a way, that album changes everything for them. But then they realized that in order to move forward, they had to reinvent their style, reinvent their sound. And in the best way possible, they decided to use a template of American music, like gospel music, blues music, early rock and roll music as a musical inspiration to bring U2 into the next level. And by gosh, do they really do just a fabulous, fantastic job on this album. This is one of these albums that I loved. I really, really love this album. Like this, amongst the pantheon of great, fantastic albums that you are instantly hooked from the very first note of the first song, going all the way into the very last note of the final song. This album, along with albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, like Tommy, like Dark Side of the Moon, really is one of these albums that is absolutely, in my opinion at least, a perfect album. Really, the word "perfect" album is ironically is kind of a bit of a subjective term. Like there is a lot of people, a lot of music fans, and a lot of especially U2 fans who have a different definition and have a different standard of what constitutes as a perfect album. For me, though, the standard of what is a perfect album for me really has to lie in a couple of criteria. Again, is very subjective and is different depending on which person you talk to, or what person is explaining his or her opinion. But for me, a perfect album has to be compelling. It doesn't have to necessarily be conceptual or rely on a story, but it has to be compelling. It has to be an album that musically and lyrically can click with me, and I stay with all the songs on the tracks on this album. It has to be lyrically and musically enticing for me to kind of go through an album. And The Joshua Tree is one of those albums. This album is just a phenomenal, fantastic album. Anyway, musically, as I have mentioned before, U2 takes a little more risk this time around. Bono felt enticed by Bob Dylan and an fellow Irish musician Van Morrison, and Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones were compelling Bono and the rest of U2 to really experiment with roots music, or to really, with quoting Bob Dylan, to return to the roots, to go back into the earlier days of American music, at least modern American music. Again, gospel, blues, early rock and roll music was the main musical inspiration for this album. And U2 really used the out of focus atmospherics of the Unforgettable Fire, the previous U2 album, and really used the experimentation of those as a starting point. And the goal for this album was to create solid, straight up songs. The goal was not to create as much as experiments in so as much as to create solid body songs. Songs with intro, verse, chorus, verse, middle bridge, outro, to create very hard-hitting, emotional, and atmospheric and yet emotionally evocative songs. And U2 really perfects every single song, every single note, every single vocal melody, and every single bass line, right down to the production, is completely crisp, perfect, and very clear. And musically, as I said before, they experiment a lot with roots music, which really combining the sense of American early rock and roll, blues, gospel, and really kind of melding it with a sense of Irish dynamicism within these songs. Like these, I think of tracks like Red Hill Mining Town. I think of tracks like I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, which is a really gospel influenced track. If you ever heard this song for the very first time, you would get the impression that this track is very gospel influenced, and it's very so much like that. You also have tracks that really evoke a sense of space, a sense of imagery, and the United States of America, the mythology of the United States of America being a place of open spaced freedom, being an ideal place of all-encompassing freedom for everyone, for every single man, woman, and child, is really the lyrical inspiration to this album, and also musically as well. Throughout all these tracks, I keep thinking that I'm in the middle of this open space desert, free of the constraints of modern life, free from the deadlines and timetables of civilian everyday living. And it's not to say that is, or not to say that I think that's horrible. It's just that these tracks really give me a sense of like this open, wide space, relaxedness. This feel of just, it's like you're seeing a desert or you're seeing a natural landscape for the very first time, and it feels ecstatic and breathtaking. All these tracks really make me feel that way, and they're like not much music really makes me feel that way. Lyrically, it's very American in the sense that like it's Bono tackling two different sentiments towards America. There is the love of America, the love of the America's ideals, the United States sense of freedom, the way the desert looks, that how it contrasts to the ideals of America, like, you know, finding new lands, new territories. That is one sentiment. The other sentiment is a little bit more biting and bitter and more scathing, and it's more a condemnation of, or if not condemnation, then at least commentary on the foreign policies of the United States, especially when I looked into the research that Bono and his wife Ali went into Ethiopia and places like Nicaragua and El Salvador to help with Amnesty International with humanitarian causes, and had to witness a lot of brutality, a lot of just brutal torture from, like, in one case in El Salvador, will become the main inspirations for tracks like Bullet the Blue Sky and Mothers Have Disappeared. The horrific crimes of the Pinochet dictatorship in El Salvador around that time, that period in 1986, as well as concerning Mothers Have Disappeared, concerning like mothers seeing or never even seeing their children again, being taken away by Pinochet's secret force, only to be killed and never seen again. Like the horrors of horrific moments such as that. And as well as Speaking Bullet the Blue Sky really kind of makes a very snarky, a very dark commentary on the negative effects of the policies of the Ronald Reagan administration, all in the name to try and stop communism, in a sense. Like, I mean, again, this goes into a much bigger discussion that's for another video, but still, lyrically, this album is teetering between those two particular sentiments: the love of the mythical America, the freedom, and the what's the word I'm looking for? The idealness of the idea of America, and the commentary on the negative effects of achieving that particular dream. And it's Bono kind of like tackling with these two different lyrical influences, which really gets down to, it almost seems like a conflict between the freedom of the open desert and the constraints and the consequences of civilian city life. And I know that's kind of weird, but that's what I get lyrically. But overall, each of these tracks are executed so perfectly, to the point that all these songs are U2's first ever. Well, they've had complete bodies of works before, but this one is one where the music really speaks for itself. And really, I could not think of an album opener to start off an incredible album such as this as Where the Streets Have No Name. Really, personally, my favorite U2 song ever in their entire catalog. This track, I could be having the worst day ever, and this track, when it comes on, lifts me from my really sucky mood and really brings me a sense of hope, brings me a sense of joy into the moment. And really, I love this track. This album, despite being this creative, this experimental, and this harsh, and even at times very dark a little bit, like, it's also hosts it to very cultural songs that are staples in modern radio today. Like, specifically, I'm talking about tracks like With or Without You and Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Really, these two tracks have really cemented themselves into the radio consciousness of modern American radio and all over the world as well. Despite this album tackling so many different things musically and lyrically, this album is the album that changes U2 entirely. This album was a phenomenal success all over the world. I think I'm not sure how right I am in the sales of this album, but this album I estimate approximately 15 million albums sold, like diamond certified. This sold like crazy all over the world. And this was U2's first ever bona fide success, and all the albums leading up to this very album was only kind of like a bit of a lead-in into this particular album, The Joshua Tree. And really, I cannot think of an album to really review any more than this. This is one of the most perfect albums I have ever heard. Tracks like Red Hill Mining Town, which really reminds me of like the miners' strike in London, England. In God's Country, which really reminds me, I keep thinking of the imagery of seeing the Statue of Liberty. Like, I'm on a ship crossing the Atlantic and I see the Statue of Liberty for the very first time. This song really reminds me of that. I think of tracks like Trip Through Your Wires, which is a really blues romper kind of song. It's fun, it's really energetic, it's full of that passionate energy. And the other thing concerning with this is the height of every single member, of all of U2's members, the height of their abilities and the height of their prowess, their skills as musicians. Bono has never been more passionate on this album than he is here. His full, open, almost operatic vocal performances on this album is stellar, top-notch vocal performances. The Edge, his guitar, his echo-laden guitar really becomes prominent. Despite this being a very blues, early rock and roll influenced album, these songs don't sound completely like that. They are used more to enhance a mood, to enhance the feeling of these songs. And Edge's guitar, especially on Where the Streets Have No Name, glorious, simply glorious. And Adam Clayton's bass is very fluid on this album. Like I think of tracks like Bullet the Blue Sky, which his bass is really thunderous and very pounding. And I think of tracks like Exit, which with in the same vein, his bass really aids the very darkness of that particular song. And Larry Mullen Jr. has really gone far in this point of U2's career. Still haven't found what I'm looking for. Is a Larry Mullen Jr. highlight. Is one of his apexes of his drumming skills, and he really brings a danceable quality to this track. Mothers of the Disappeared is probably one of my favorite album closers. It's so dark and it's so not depressing, but it's almost yearning for healing. It's a concerning song yearning for healing, and one of the most perfect closers to an album ever. And I could go on, but essentially I'm going 16 minutes, so the rating for this album, you had to know that was coming. You really had to know this was coming. 5 out of 5 points of stars, whatever you want to call it, but it's all a 5. The Joshua Tree is one of the most perfect, most essential, and most amazing albums that you should own, especially if you're a newbie to U2's work. This is a perfect album to start off with. And even though you may not get this album right away, at least for the second half of this album, at least that was my experience. First time listening to this album, the more you spend time with this album, the more it sinks in with you. This album is not only home to some of U2's biggest hits, it's also home to some of U2's most original, most influential, and most innovative songs to ever come out in music history. I cannot recommend this album enough. I don't care what you do, like look up on YouTube, buy it in your record store, look up on Spotify, whatever, but really have this album in your collection. This is an essential album to have in your CD collection or your digital collection. I really implore you guys that. So I've said enough. So one more thing that I want to mention before I go. I want to give a shout out to Josh, aka Afro Avenger music reviewers. Like he gave me a shout out on his video for the Beatles' Rubber Soul, and I really feel very humbled of that shout out. I really do. Like I really want to thank you so much for that, because that really made my day when you posted that video, and I really thank you very eternally for that. And I would like to recommend to you guys his channel. Like he has a YouTube channel. I'll leave it a link in the description below. He's a really nice guy. He's a very down to earth, really nice and approachable kind of person. Even if you never get to meet him, just by seeing him, you get this impression that he is just super down to earth, extremely friendly, and has a really wicked afro hairdo to boot, which is super cool. And so yeah, if you like your album reviews to be a little bit more conversational and a little bit more of a hint of production to it, then he's definitely the reviewer for you. So check out his stuff. He really does really great album reviews, really has really great stuff on his channel. Again, I'll leave a link to the description box below. And yeah, shout out to you, and I definitely thank you for the shout out. Really thank you for that. And I hope this review did justice for you. If it did, or if it did not, leave a comment on the comment section below, as well as you guys. What do you think of this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Why? U2, the Joshua Tree, it's only going to get bigger from here, so leave a comment, leave your thoughts, and I will see you next time. U2, Joshua Tree, Mr. Music Fan, I'll see you guys later.